How's it going?
Good. Good.
Let me ask, who are you? Right? Raise your hand if you're a rep. Okay. Raise your hand if you're a, well, actually, since you were like the only two that didn't raise your hand.
Custom integrators.
You're guests of American Lighting, custom integrators.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So in this area, in the Dallas area?
Dallas.
Great, great. Okay, good. So since there are more reps than the custom integrators at the moment, I'll make fun of the custom integrators during the presentation because you'll protect me, right? Right?
We'll take it.
Yeah, you'll take it. Good, good. Fair enough. So let me talk about linear lighting, and let me give you the 4 learning objectives first. This is what I hope you take away from this presentation. Because I'm gonna quiz you at the end of this, right? So as long as you at the end of this say, "Wow, lots of American lighting," that's for you guys. I want lots and lots of, and then they'll invite me back next time. So I used to do a bunch of, and I still do a lot of AIA presentations, and they make you come up with 4 learning objectives every time. And it's sort of like, well, what if there are only 3? Then you're making up the 4th, right? So these are all actually true. Probably the most honest I've ever been in learning objectives in a presentation. But really what we want to talk about are why linear lighting, where do we use linear lighting, and how do we use linear lighting? When Jennifer first asked me to talk about linear lighting, I thought, well, how in the world can I fill a presentation on just linear lighting? And the question since then, since I started thinking about this in that term, was, actually, I'm always talking about linear lighting because linear lighting now is such an integral part of lighting. So it's kind of easy to answer these questions, but we're going to go through them one at a time, and then I will quiz you at the end. So why linear lighting? I'm going to look at 3 different things. First, technology, the technology revolution that's happened that we all know about, that we're all still trying to figure out who won. But the technology revolution that happened and is happening. Health, that's all over the news. No one's been talking about lighting so much in 100 years, but now we do. Now it's on NPR, it's all over the place. So health, and then of course the most important of all, the most important reason we should look at linear lighting if you want to make a buck is money. We'll take a look at that as well. So technology revolution is kind of where we're going to start, but I want to quiz your lighting knowledge because I need to assess where you are in this. So I'm going to pick on Jason again, and this is the last time I'm going to pick on you for at least 5 minutes. These are true-false questions. The Department of Energy just eliminated LED requirements for candelabra, globe, and reflector lamps, potentially requiring taxpayers to pay for $15 billion in new power plants by 2025. Is that true or false? Is that true or false?
False.
Is that true or false? True, there you go, you got it right. Okay, so California is suing the Trump administration over this because they want to keep the restrictions in place. Essentially what has happened recently is that there has been a rollback of the energy efficiency requirements that were supposed to go in place January 1st. What'd you say?
Burn more oil.
Burn more oil, yeah. So the people who count numbers are saying, we have to come up with $15 billion worth of new power plants to keep going with the incandescent light source, because we're using more and more electricity as we stay with incandescent. Signify, formerly Philips Lighting Division, has 9 conventional lamp factories. 2 years ago, it had 46. I'm going to ask Rogers.
I don't know the answer to that, but I'll say true.
You'll say true. You're a fast learner, Rogers. Yeah, yeah. That is true, right? So what happens when you take one of the world's largest light bulb manufacturers and that's a number that you see in terms of their manufacturing, right? Something major is happening. That's the technology revolution that's happening. Okay, so Suzanne, I'm going to ask you a question. David Warfel, that's me, by the way. Oh, I just touched that. Sorry about that. David Warfel has written for Fine Home Building, House, Lighting and Sound America, Live Design, and The New Yorker. Is that true or false?
True.
She's flattering. That's false. The New Yorker would never take anything I wrote. But if it has If it has like lighting or home or any of that kind of boring stuff in it, then yeah, I've written for that. Okay, let's ask another question. Mike?
Yes.
Linear lighting includes neon, fluorescent, cold cathode, fiber optics, LEDs, electroluminescent, and incandescent sources. Is that true or false?
True.
That's true, yeah. But all of those other ones are not very good sources except for LED, right? So when we talk about linear lighting, we've been doing linear lighting for 50 years, right? Ever since the fluorescent came out, the linear fluorescent bulb. And of course, you've got the neon from the 50s and 60s that was everywhere. Now we just are able to do it much easier without breaking it. So that's to give you just an idea of, yes, linear's been around for a while, but because of the technology revolution that's happening, everything has been changing. Okay, I'm going to skip to the front and say, let's take a look at the economics, right? Because if there's no economic reason to get into linear lighting, then why do it other than, I don't know, because it looks pretty. So let's see, I'm not going to pick on you, this guy. Daryl,
Yes,
can I
sir.
ask you a question?
You may.
How much of a construction project, let's pick a nice high-end residence, how much of a construction project lighting budget goes to recessed versus linear?
I'm not sure of the difference, but you can spend 70 to 80,000 bucks on a lighting job on a house.
And how much of that money do you think is recessed versus linear?
I don't really know.
You don't really know? Anybody want to take a guess? He just said you could spend $70,000 on a house.
Probably mostly recessed.
It's mostly recessed, Joel? Okay.
80%.
80%? 80%? Okay, yeah. So like I've got a little pie chart here, and out of a $100,000 job, I said 95,000 in recessed. So maybe it's a little less than that, right? And then we had this little piece of the linear pie. It's under counter,
Typically
right? Or under
cabinet.
cabinet. Yeah, that's where we use linear today, right? However, right, when we look into the future, and actually most of the jobs, so I'm a lighting designer and my company designs usually partnered with integrators, but all over the country. So our projects, I asked one of my team to add up the projects from the last 6 months, average things and look at them. It's not unusual for us to do a $100,000 job with $55,000 in recessed downlighting and $45,000 in linear, right? So it's not, for us, when we get involved in the design, it's not 80% recessed. It's 60% recessed or 55% recessed. So that's shifting, and I think that's in progress. Another way to look at this is with a graph. So if you've got a recessed light up here, that's a nice little recessed light, and then here's a little piece of linear tape light, right? You say, what's happening to the recessed portion is this, right? The potential sales there is moving down, whereas the linear is moving up.
Why would you say that's happening? Because in a traditional home, I can't see using linear on the ceiling or...
We're going to get to that in a minute. Yeah, so that's a great question, right? Linear is great in modern applications. What about traditional homes? I pack twice as much linear into a traditional home as I do a modern home, and maybe 3 times as much, but we'll take a look at how. So when you look at traditional lighting that's based on downlights, you get this grid, right? Architects are really particular about making everything symmetrical on their drawings. So they lay out this nice grid, and they're like, this is how we want you to light that. We'll give you 9 recessed downlights. So you've got one load, one control load. You've got 9 fixtures in there, and they're paying $50 a can. Actually, probably they're only paying $12 a can. The electrician is then marking it up to $35, and then they're paying $2,000 is their lighting budget for this 3,000 square foot home. It's been pushed down, commoditized to where there's no money there. However, we're seeing when we get into design and we start moving into the high-end residence, we're shifting that, right? So first of all, we're moving to a better downlight. We're moving to recessed multiples. We're moving to something that changes, that has color in it or something of that nature. It drives the cost up. But that's only one component of the design. Usually then there's linear. in different places like coves or like what's going on in here in ceiling patterns, et cetera. And that's going to move the fixture cost up even more. So when we do a project, it's not unusual for them to have a $2,000 budget for recessed downlights and for them to end up spending $25,000 for that same apartment, $25,000 on the fixtures, just because what's out there is pretty inexpensive. And linear is a huge part of that. Here's a house in Naples. This one's in Naples, and we're working on it, and we're laying out the design. So here's a lighting plan. Everybody's seen one, hopefully. Raise your hand if you haven't, and you have not seen a lighting plan? Oh, okay, yeah. No, I was going to say, has anybody not seen a lighting plan? Have you not seen a lighting plan? Because you're lying. Hi, I'm David.
Yeah, Bob.
Are you Bob? Are you from ProStream Digital, or did you just steal the jacket? Oh, okay, awesome. Integrator?
Yes.
Awesome. In the area?
Uh-huh.
Fantastic. Ever seen a lighting plan?
You bet.
Okay, so where do we use linear, right? If you look closely at the plan, here is the linear lighting that we're calling out on this particular plan. And yes, there is definitely linear lighting in that kitchen, but that is not the only place we are putting linear lighting in this house, right? It's virtually everywhere. And it just keeps going from there. There were a lot of downlights in that house as well, but you can see how with that linear footage, we can do 1,000 feet in a house. It's not crazy to do that. Recessed downlights, that number is shrinking compared to the growth that is in the linear category for us. And it could go even further. So when I look at the future, is there going to be less linear lighting or more than there is right now? I only see it going one direction, and that's more. A few months ago, this is my mom's kitchen, farmhouse in central Illinois. I'm a farm kid, grew up in the cornfields, quite literally in the cornfields. Dad's a farmer, he just retired, he's 79, and he's crying all the time because farmers usually they just die in the field. They don't ever want to quit. Anyway, Mom's got her kitchen, she's 78, and redid it 15 years ago, and I did the lighting for it, and I was like, oh, I'm going to do this amazing lighting design. So I used 4-inch Juno cans, and I used Juno halogen bars underneath the cabinets. And the more I researched and the more I thought about it and the more I looked at the ugly scallops, and I was like, this is really bad lighting design. I'm kind of embarrassed about it. So last fall I called up my mom and I said, Mom, can I redo the lighting in your kitchen? And she's one of those moms who if I said, Mom, can I burn your kitchen down for a project? She would say, well, I guess, like, okay, fine. So she consented to let me come in and redo it. She's a good mom, yeah. So here it is with recessed downlights and with halogen under cabinet lights, right? Here is a traditional kitchen, by the way, right? It's about as traditional as you can get. And here it is after the renovation. We can light that kitchen without a single recessed downlight, and that was my goal for the project, to see if it could be done. And when you look at the transformation in the space, we didn't change anything except the lighting. We went in there and we did it. The only piece that was added was a little piece of molding there so that we could put lighting up and down. Oh, that's not even a complete picture. Yeah. So the technology, like even in a traditional house, I can use hundreds of feet of linear lighting. And we'll talk a little bit more about.
What was her reaction to having the lighting down low in the kick?
Okay, so that's a great question. Chris, yeah. Toe kick lighting, right? As a lighting designer for previous years, and that actually gets into our next point on the health side. For toe kick lighting for years was like, well, that's really cool, but who the heck needs it, right? It's like, what a pain in the neck to do, and who wants to do it? So I did a fair amount of research into light and health and was doing some design work in senior living facilities. So I was looking at like retirement communities, memory care units, and also just assisted living facilities, those kinds of projects, right, on the architectural side. And I looked into all this and found, I just stumbled across a study that said balance is aided by what we see. So in other words, if it's pitch dark, we have a harder time maintaining our balance. If it's light, it's easier. And at night, if you want to keep it dark so you're not disturbing your circadian rhythm, if you have a line of light where the wall meets the floor and your vision isn't so good anymore, that line becomes an orientation. It allows our body to subconsciously balance itself. So I was like, yeah, you don't need it. Don't worry about it. But when you fall, don't blame me, right? Don't blame me. So, yeah, right? So the toe kick lighting, I've actually started to suggest now far more often. And we had a client, actually the plan you saw a minute ago with all those red lines over it, I was talking to the client. They were in their mid-40s, and I said, well, we've got toe kick lighting in there, but I only, that's certainly an option. And, I explained to them the whole health thing that I just explained. And I said, you guys are in your 40s. We don't need to do it. And the client said, you know what? My mom comes over. We want that, right? So it was like, okay, even my client didn't need it. But once they had heard the justification for it, they were like, yeah, let's do toe kick lighting. Uh-huh.
What was the difference in the light output between your recess coming down and your linear light, which seemed to be more of an ambient type light,
So yeah,
reflecting off the ceiling?
so right, I'm going to admit to a mistake. So yeah, so right, in that photograph has one layer of light that's not on, and that's a light that actually grazes down the front of the cabinets. So I think I've got a photograph later that shows that. When they're all on, we cut the wattage, I want to say, by about 70%, and doubled the foot candles on the task plane. And what's crazy about that, and why I did it from an aging perspective, is that if you have a 4-inch can or a 2-inch can over the counter, which is sort of the way we normally do a kitchen, you hold your hand there, there's a nice distinct shadow, right? In that kitchen, when I hold my hand under it, there is no shadow, right? Because you've got all the different diodes canceling each other out. So it becomes this incredible shadow-free space, really, phenomenally better illumination. Now, at twice the foot candles, it's actually too much. Like, we have to dim it to get it to be comfortable, or use a tape that has a lower output. However, as our eyes age, we need more light. So if you've got the headroom there, you can go for it. These are great questions. Thank you. A little background on linear lighting, right? This technology change has happened in the last 20 years. You know it. In 2000, I was designing an exhibit for the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. And it was all about clocks, about time. And we wanted to get linear lighting in there. So our choices were fiber optics, which we used, right? So then we used those linear low voltage festoons, where you have like thousands of little lamps, and they put out enough heat to cook things. That's what we used because that's what we had. It was ridiculously expensive, right? But it was the only way to do it if you wanted to bend light, right? It was the only way to do it, and it was the only way to make it tiny. And if you wanted to make it change color, well, that sort of you couldn't really do, right? Although fiber optics we could. So whenever we needed to change color, we used fiber optics so that he had the big generator. And my boss at the time said, where do we use fiber optics? Like, when is that the right choice? Because at that time I was like, whatever the cool trick is, I want to do it. And he was much more experienced, and he said, we use fiber optics when there's absolutely no other option. And I was like, okay, that tells you how much of a pain in the neck it was, and also how expensive it was and how easy it was to get cut from a project. You fast forward to 2020, 2019 when we were doing the kitchen. How do you do all those things? Well, now we do it with LED, and by the way, now it's low heat, it's low energy, it's long lasting, and it's way less expensive, right? So I could do that exhibit 20 years ago now, way better for less money because of the linear revolution and because of the LED revolution. All right, let's talk a little bit about the health. We can skim through this because we've had some good questions that have taken us there already. But you hear all this about circadian rhythm, about tunable white, about how melatonin suppression ends at night. We need that melatonin to sleep. In the morning, we get a cortisol spike. This is all part of our circadian rhythm. There are a lot of other things that happen in that track. When it gets off, we have jet lag, right? So if anyone flew here from, anybody fly here from Spain? No. So you get jet lag, right? Because the chemical process takes several days to correct itself. And it corrects itself based on whether you've got light coming into your eyes. So you get your melatonin suppression in, so when you're trying to stay awake, and all of a sudden you got all this melatonin flooding through you and you're falling asleep during my lecture. And then when you're trying to go to sleep, that cortisol spike that is supposed to wake you up in the morning comes, and you're like, hey, it's 3 o'clock and I'm awake, right? This is a bad thing, we all know it. What we have done over the last 100 years since the practicalization of electric light is built walls with fewer and fewer windows between us and the outside. So for example, 100 years ago, this showroom wouldn't have been possible really. And you would know exactly what time it is because there'd be a huge bank of windows or sawtooth roof overhead to get light into the space, right? Now we can do completely without it. Well, in building all of these walls, we have created a permanent condition of jet lag. It's actually called social jet lag, where we don't have those regular cues. We don't have those conditions. And it's linked to all kinds of messy stuff, all kinds of bad stuff. So the health really becomes an important factor. And when I'm talking to clients about lighting, are you going to buy more lighting? Are you going to buy into my expensive lighting design, right? When I say I want 1,000 feet of linear, because it looks cool or because it's better for your health? One of those reasons, I have had probably 2 clients, right, who are like, I'll just buy it if it looks cool. And then 8 of those 10 clients say, oh, the health, that's the reason they're going to go for it, right? So if we can use tunable white, RGB tunable white, et cetera, to do this, we can start to correct the problems in the health. Here's a vision of that kitchen. And then the difference, is completely different. We can start to relax by making the color change warmer. We can get rid of shadows by bouncing off the ceiling. We can do the balance aid on the bottom. Then we can shift the color, and we can get back to more natural circadian rhythms. And that's what it's all about. So here it is with the light coming down. And you can see that there's no scallops on the cabinets. I as a designer, I'm like, oh, you got to work really hard to get that downlight right over the seam, right over the center of each cabinet so it looks good. And then, of course, there's a joist there and a pipe there, so the downlight's over, and maybe nobody notices it but me, but it drives me nuts. No problem. I don't even have anything in the ceiling in this case, right? So there it is with a very even front light. And it's 100% linear.
Did you put them on different loads, I guess? So the
Yes.
counter was different than
Yes.
so you could dim them separately?
Yes. I'm a lighting designer, and I also came from I studied architecture and I also studied theater. So in the theater, like anything less than 200 or 300 dimmers is like not cool. So, I want to dim every diode separately if I can. Right? Yeah, it's a good question. So where do we use linear? The real question is, where do we not use linear? Right? I mean, the kitchen is a good example of that. If I can go into a farmhouse kitchen and use linear everywhere, then where do you not use linear? But let me give you a few more examples. This is that second section, so it's a chance for more questions. Did you say Bob? Bob? Wow, I remembered that. It's like the first time I've ever remembered a name because I get all like stressed out that I'm going to forget it and call you Susan. But that's I'm going to ask you this question. Osram recently introduced LEDs that use quantum dots to more efficiently produce red wavelengths for warm white LEDs. Is that true or false?
I'm going to say true.
You're going to say true. Okay, tell us what a quantum dot is. I have, you know, like, when did you see quantum dots and lighting? Like, this is weird stuff, right? The technological revolution is still going on. I don't know what a quantum dot is, right? I read the article and I still don't know what a quantum dot is. I just know it's really, really tiny. So the technology revolution is still happening. And we think of linear lighting as being empowered by small diodes. They're getting smaller, right? That's what this basically says. Okay, who has not answered a question yet? I'm going to go into the third row. Will, are you writing your grocery list or taking notes?
Taking notes.
You're taking notes? Wow.
Not smart enough to remember.
Wow. Man, even when I was a professor, no one took notes. They just slept. All right, so here's a question for you. What'd you say? I didn't have you in the class.
A little too early.
Yeah, it was a little too early. Okay, here's a question for you. American Lighting will give everyone in the room a new Tesla Roadster with their first $5,000 order. Is that true or false?
I wish it was true. I'd have it in my house right now.
Hey, Jennifer, true or false? Okay. Right. Okay, that's true. That's the giveaway. If you haven't figured it out by now, there's one false question in every set. All right. Okay, Dan. The National Institute for Aging just gave $3.8 million to the Lighting Research Center for a study of LED lighting intervention that may lead to the prevention of Alzheimer's.
I'd say that's true.
It's true, right?
Because one in a set is false.
Right, right. Dan, you're really smart, right? So $3.8 million to the Lighting Research Center, the LRC at Rensselaer, and that's because they've been studying how light affects our health and how if you do circadian lighting in a memory care unit, there's less cases of sundowning, the agitation goes down, sleep improves, cognition improves, like the symptoms of Alzheimer's and dementia are lessened, are reduced when they do this. And it got them thinking, well, what if it's actually part of the cause of this disease? And the most recent study is that they put people in, to the CAT scans and watch things. There's actually a fluid in our brain that comes in waves when we do a certain kind of sleep. It's not REM sleep, it's a different kind of sleep that is essentially cleaning our brain of the stuff that has been linked to Alzheimer's. Right? So if we're not in sync, bad stuff happens. And we don't know how this will end, but if the National Institute for Aging just gave them $3.8 million, they're thinking there's real potential, there's a real possibility here, right? This is worth following up on. So that's good. Okay, so you've folded your arms across your name tag. So you have to tell us your name again. Tom. Okay, Tom, I'm going to ask you a question.
Yes.
Is it true or false? Yeah, see, he knows. San Diego is using smart lighting poles with cameras to convict criminals and exonerate the innocent.
No.
You want to answer again?
Yes.
Right? So in this case, it's not the light itself that's doing the work, but integrated lighting that's embedded with technology is being used for so many things, like light fixtures that track where you are in the store and give you coupons to the product that's next to you, right? This is actually something that Target has rolled out with Acuity. And San Diego, yes, they are basically using that in court, both to convict and to exonerate. And in England, they go even farther. They actually, if you're somebody that they think is suspicious, they'll follow you from pole to pole to pole until you commit the crime, and then they'll pick you up. And there's a few privacy concerns with that, but in England, since the
No right to privacy.
right, and England has been, after the tube bombings, they went all in on the security system. So they actually sit around and watch the cameras to find a crime before it happens. So I think of light and we're talking about where do you use, the question here is where do you use linear lighting or where do you not use linear lighting? Anybody heard the terms task ambient accent? Raise your hand if you have. Nod, yeah, okay, task ambient accent, right? So that's what I was taught in school. It's like you use task ambient accent. So linear works well for task, it works well for ambient, and does it work well for accent? I don't know, maybe, but that usually means a wall sconce that they end up cutting. So I actually got away from that language and I said, you know what, I don't actually care about that. What I want to know is what is light doing for me? When I'm in that space, what does light do for me? And light, I think, does these 5 things. Light helps me see what I'm doing so I can do it better, right? Light helps me know where I am, know who's sleeping while I'm talking, know where I'm going, etc., right? Light helps me feel better. Not only does it help me feel better, but of course we're learning that it actually helps me be better, right? Healthy, more healthy. Light helps me focus on what's important to me, and it helps me adapt to changes easier, whether that's mood, time of day, or as my eyes age. All of these things are what I call the 5 promises of light. And when I talk to clients about the 5 promises of light, I convince them to do a lot more lighting than when I talk about task ambient and accent. Task ambient and accent are just they're a little bit too technical for me. So I go one step further and I talk about a red velvet cake, because I love red velvet cake. And I'm like, hey, I want it in layers just like I want my lighting. Now, if you take away a layer of this cake or one of the pieces of the lighting spectrum or a layer of lighting, it's not so bad. It's still a pretty good piece of cake. But when we start to do what is, I would say, typical lighting design, and we start to take away these other things, let me back up there. If we say there's no linear lighting, then what are we left with? We're not left with very much, right? We're starting to take away the tools we have to get all those layers. So if I'm just doing it with downlights, I can't actually achieve all of these things. Linear has to be a part of that. So when we say we're not linear, here's a wine cellar. And there is a recessed downlight because they had a plate that they wanted to show off. And everything else in this is linear. So the under cabinet, of course, is linear. We made a custom detail and put it into the wine rack, so when you pull it out, there's light on the label. So when you're seeing it, rather than just shining a downlight at it. And then, of course, there's light in the crown in a detail we developed to illuminate the cherry woodwork in there.
So it's below the crown?
It's below the crown. Yeah, yeah. I prefer to call attention to the really nice woodwork and not the drywall. So this is a good example. Okay, here's a very traditional space, but I'm using almost 100% linear. I'll send you the photo if just give me a business card and I'll send it to you. So here's some sketches from our design process when we're working on houses. Where do you see linear in there? All over the place, right? Where do you see linear in there? All over the place. We can use it in bathrooms. We can use it. You see it around mirrors, of course, all over the place, right? Here's I've got a photo of a space very similar to this, but here it is in a ceiling of a space, replacing recessed downlights as the. What'd you say?
Was that a sink? A rendering of a sink on the right side?
There is a sink on the right. Yeah, it's just a
It's
bad sketch. It's just me sketching.
It's all right. I just tried
Yeah, no, it's good. It's actually a frog in winter. Yeah, right. So here's another one. I don't remember what I sketched. Yeah. Here we are using it as a step light. Instead of a step light, we're using linear as a step light. So it's like we can use it pretty much anywhere. And that project is almost done. Of course, you know it as a neon replacement, right? My first interaction with my first discovery of American lighting was probably 7 or 8 years ago. And I designed the exterior of a space, and I wanted some neon on it. And so I specified what I always specified and sent it out there, and the showroom said, we don't want to get that stuff, but we've got this American lighting. And I was like, who's this American light? I don't know who this is. So they ended up putting the American lighting in, and it looks great. It's not this project, but I can send you a photo if you want. Because that was sort of one of the first places we started seeing a lot of linear, especially in colors, was in the neon replacement. But now it's gone far beyond that. You can see that all the light in this area is actually linear light that's being reflected off of the steel overhang there. And we're using it behind the sign. This is an escape room, a puzzle room on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship. We did 3 in this style, and there's linear at 3 different cove levels. It's behind the chalkboard. It's underneath in that mica that's lit up on the inside. It's all over.
Diffusers and stuff like that too, right? Diffusing rails to be able to spread the light so you don't see the individual LEDs.
So you either diffuse it or you engineer the detail in such a way that there's enough distance. Yeah, so some of it had diffusers and some of it did not. Yeah, like this. If you took the plastic off, you'd see the tape. Schools, right? Can you use it in a commercial space? Yeah, absolutely. This is a middle school, and it's like, yeah, you can do performance linear now that you can get an extrusion with a lot of power in it. You can do just about anything. And here is, they're just moving into this like this week, but this is we're getting close to finishing this project, and it's one of the sketches from earlier. We've got linear here, of course, in the toe kick, and of course in the cove as well. But in this case, we're aligning with the mullions in that space and just putting linear stripes across the ceiling. And this is American product. That's this kind of product. And it's just a clean, modern apartment space. It's a condo. This is in South Bend, Indiana, which is known for being on the progressive edge of architecture, or it's not, right? That's sarcasm. So, when you're doing all this linear in South Bend, it's going to be everywhere, right? It's going to be everywhere. And here's a traditional, right? You turn the, we haven't photographed this project. They have moved in, but we haven't done real photographs of it yet. And I want to do a photograph where it's turned off, and then one where it's turned on, because it completely changes the feel of the room and the effect of the ceiling.
But you got downlights in there as well, right?
I do have downlights in there as well, because it's a super high ceiling.
Right.
Yeah, so there's always a balance of what do we do, and do we put downlights in? But I'll be honest with you, we are now putting downlights in. When we design, and I teach my designers that the downlight is the last piece of lighting we put into our plans. That we try to do it otherwise, and then we put the downlights in. So in this case, sometimes the downlights are there for what I might call it, CYA move, right? So to make sure that if they're like, we want more foot candles, we can give it to them. So there's linear lighting. All right, how linear lighting? How do we do it? How do we get everybody from the designer to the seller to the electrician and builder and contractor, et cetera, how do we get them to do this? Because to be honest with you, linear lighting in its infancy could be a real pain in the neck, right? And so the manufacturers have been working really, really hard to make this easier. But you still have to do a little bit of thinking about it, because it may be the first time the electrician has ever done linear lighting. So you have to help them bridge that gap. Okay. Chris, have I asked you a question yet? No. Okay. Human-centric lighting for wellness includes sensors and controls, color tunability, dimming, personalized settings for age, gender, chronotype, and activity, circadian light, presets for activities, and natural light according to the Lighting Europe and IALD Europe. Like how could I make up something like that technical? Right, right. The IALD stands for the International Association of Lighting Designers. So they're saying, okay, we're trying to define what HCL or human-centric lighting is. And this is how they've defined it. You'll see in there it's a lot of different things. So you've got to have controls, for example. You've also got to have light in there that changes. You've got to have dimming. You've got to have circadian. You've got to have presets for different activities, et cetera. This can't be done without somebody who knows something about controls. It can't, right? And so that's why I think the integrators in the room, all 3 of you, right? Right? The future is in your hands, because other people don't know how to do that stuff, and you do. So I think that's a critical importance. And yesterday, let's see, Acuity announced it would acquire the Luminaries Group I'm going to ask this of you, Guy. Is it Guy or Guy?
Either one. I'm easy.
Okay. All right. I'll switch every time. So Guy, Acuity announced it would acquire the Luminaries Group, parent of A-Light, Cyclone, Eureka, Luminaire, LED, and Luminous, which could bring Acuity's annual sales to $3.8 billion. Is that true or false?
True.
Yeah, I don't make this stuff up. This fact is in there because you can see that when, that the lighting industry has changed significantly and is continuing to change. And Luminous, I think, is linear. Is Luminous linear? Do you guys know? Yeah. So it's like, okay, when you get somebody who's like a huge player in the commercial downlight market or the commercial 2x4 troffer downlight market, troffer market buying linear, it's like, well, even they know it's happening, right? So even they're trying to get into it. They've been pretty weak in it, honestly. I don't know that I've specified linear from Acuity in decades, other than the old pendants that we put in offices, right? The industry is changing. Okay, how's it going?
Great. How are
Peter?
you? Yep.
I'm David.
Hello, David.
Do you work for American?
I do not.
You do not? It says you do.
It does. They lie.
Yeah, it says that on my tag too. Yeah,
They like
yeah,
me too.
yeah. Well, no, she's going to give me a new Tesla for this. So
He already has one, so.
you already have one? Maybe she's giving me your Tesla. All right,
She'd have to kill me.
that can be arranged.
It can.
All right, Peter. Philips announced a new line of Hue, which is their smart bulb, filament-style smart bulbs.
So true.
So true. Yeah, right? It's like we're putting smart into everything, and it just keeps going in that direction. All right. Mark, I know you, even though you're covering your name tag. GE makes appliances, light bulbs, and jet engines.
That would be true.
So Mark said this is true. Where's the false question? Yeah, because it wasn't yesterday. Okay, with that minor technicality aside, there's one in here that's really false. Anybody know what it is? Why is it the last one, Chris? They're not making light bulbs anymore. No, you can still buy GE light bulbs, but they're not made by GE. And you can still buy GE appliances, but they're not made by GE, right? They're made by Haier. How do you pronounce Haier? Made by Haier? Yeah. So I got a GE appliance. We were selling our house, and we were like, oh, we got to have stainless steel. So we're like, okay, give us the cheapest stainless steel you can, and we'll throw it in the house so we can put it on the market. And they brought, so we got GE appliances, and they brought them in. And the guy puts the refrigerator in, and he's like, do you want the GE badge on it? I'm like, the what? It's like the GE badge. He pulls it out of his bag. It's the GE, icon. He's like, I can stick it on there if you want, or we can just leave it. Like GE made that part, or at least that part was GE. It's like, okay, put it on. Now it's a GE appliance. So that's false. And the reason I put this in here, of course, is that GE, General Electric, started out as Edison's General Electric. It is the company that, basically brought us the modern lighting industry, right? They don't do light bulbs anymore. Like, everything is changing in this industry. All right, so how do we do it? Knowing that lighting is in chaos in many ways, that this industry is in chaos, that we're pushing the envelope for some of our folks, and where do we put it? Okay, so how do we get it in there? Well, sometimes it's easy, right? You got a floating vanity, you just put it underneath. You route in the housing if you want, a nice aluminum housing with a lens, and it's done. It's not that complicated. Some of these are taking, have become so standard that it's like we just do that now. It's not a thought. Some of it requires a little more detail, like when you do the secondary crown piece underneath to illuminate the crown and get the indirect. So some of those details you have to think about. How do we do it and how do we sell it as well is about experience. So you come in and you experience a space and it's better, right? What'd you say?
4x3 screen.
Isn't that crazy? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, the lighting is much nicer than the screen. I don't know. There's a better screen, right?
Yes, Mitsubishi.
So we're talking now about showroom experiences. So how often, Jason, do you sell audio?
Yes.
Do you sell high-end audio?
Yes.
Do people look at a picture of a speaker and then they're like, that's what I want?
Very rarely, but sometimes.
Sometimes, right? What happens? How do you sell it most of the time?
A demo.
A demo. They listen to it, right? So if it comes in here, then they're like, oh, that is better than the Bluetooth speaker I bought at Walgreens. Yeah, right, right. So I think we need to think about lighting in the same way, right? We need to demo it. You show someone in a catalog a piece of tape light or a downlight, and it's like, well, yeah, but the electrician said he can get it for $12, so I'm not gonna go with this. But when you experience it, the question is then about the experience, not about the cost of the product. I mean, that'll happen, of course, but we change it. So we're starting to think about showroom vignettes in the same way that you might have with showing off screens that come out of the floor and close and all that stuff. And saying, okay, well, let's put recessed downlights in there so that you can show them how fabulous this space is under recessed downlights, but then also turn them off. You have controls and start bringing up the linear lighting in the space that's maybe illuminating the ceiling, maybe it's underneath a floating bench or a mantle, maybe it's inside the glass cabinets, maybe it's behind the television creating it to flow, maybe it's coming down from a linear stripe in the kitchen like this, and the shelves, right? So it's illuminating the shelves in those floating shelves that everyone loves. We've got the linear in there. It's underneath the bar top, right, in the island counter, and you can even do art with linear. Once you get all of these layers of linear, like right now, it's all linear in that space. It's going to be a heck of a lot easier to actually convince someone to move towards a linear solution when they can experience the difference. And then you just open up the cabinet and show them all the cool different things that the technology. If they want to know what's happening, you can show them that. But it's not really how you sell it. You don't walk in and show them a piece of tape light. You walk in and walk them through an experience, and you take them through this. So you show it to them, and you're like, "That's the difference," and they're like, "Oh, that's the difference." So here, to answer your question, this was when we were building it. We photographed each layer individually. And then you can start to talk about the different effects. So if you have that in a showroom, you can say, well, what is important to you? We can balance this out to create a bunch of different effects. Let's see, I think I have, you build it back, right? Until you've got the whole thing going. The only one that my mom really likes is the light in here, right? Right. What'd you say?
Is that her?
That's her pantry.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so when you open it up, I've got a little motion sensor in there, and it pops on. My dad likes the rest of it. Although I will say that my mom hates change. Like if she could, she'd still be driving that original Robin's Egg blue minivan. No, actually, Pontiac station wagon with the wood grain siding. She'd still be driving that if it hadn't fallen apart years ago. We show them sketches to convince people to do linear lighting. So here's a project where it's a traditional home, and we're like, yeah, we can light the outside of that with a bunch of uplights, bullet lights around the house. It'll look really pretty. You got some lights on the carriage house doors, right? And a lantern over the door. This is pretty typical. This is what happens a lot of the time. And we say, well, you know what? If we have linear, we have the power to do a few more things, right? Like actually highlight the curve of this space, highlight the curve of this detail. Like that's not a cheap window. Let's make sure we notice it. Graze in a linear fashion to really call more attention to the stone than the scallop of light, right? So put light up in here and illuminate linear light up in there and illuminate it. And it's like, we showed these two sketches to a designer for this house, and they were like, that's all I need to see. I'm convinced, right? That was it.
But you don't have anything down below to show the stone off on the bottom? I mean, that's kind of what those lights are for, right?
So the bullet lights are, let's see. Yeah, so the bullet lights down here that we don't have, no, I actually don't have them in this sketch at all. Like, probably what we're going to do in this one is once they've get landscape in there, we'll call attention to landscape. But this one, by the way, other than the couple of uplights that are here, is also pushing more light down and keeping dark sky friendly. So these people live in the mountains of North Carolina, and dark sky is important to them. So if we start going from the top of the stone down, we're reducing significantly the light pollution from that house. So linear can be helpful in that as well.
And we have a city that has this code.
Right. Yep. So if you're going out to Boulder, or where's it in New Mexico as well, and where's the city that?
Westlake.
Westlake? Okay, yeah. And I think we'll see more and more of those, right? So linear. If you can do it, they can do it, right? So electricians are used to doing this. They're used to plugging a recessed can into your panelized system or into a breaker box or through a switch, and et cetera. So if you're using controls, they're used to doing that. Linear to wire linear lighting is significantly more complicated because you can't just do that, right? It's way complicated. So I'm going to teach you how to do that right now. You put a driver in between, okay? Anybody have questions about that? I know that was a lot to throw at you in one slide, right? Right? But for some reason, we sometimes get people panic about this, right? Because they're just not familiar with it. It's not that big of a deal to wire this stuff up. And as we're seeing what's happening, especially with the with wider and wider adoption of DMX, is that this just gets easier, actually, not really much harder. You can also embed the, DMX would be embedding the dimming technology into the driver or into that system somehow so that you're really just running power to it and then a control signal. And that's the way I would love to do it. In a kitchen, I would love to say, well, here's a power supply and a DMX box that's going to break down into the different zones. So I'm just sending one line voltage and one low voltage signal to that kitchen. And all the linear is being handled, right? So in some ways, I think linear will make life easier in the future. We also do a lot of mock-ups. It's like we had this idea about burying light, burying a linear strip into a piece of trim so it would graze down the window so it wouldn't always look like a black mirror at night. You'd get a nice soft glow out of there. So we grabbed some 1x4s, stuck some tape up in there, and made it. And the client was like, oh yeah, I really like that. We have to show it to them because it's not everywhere. So we do a lot of mock-ups. It's not hard to do. It's not expensive to do. This is like a freeze board in a, how do you get linear lighting into a 20-foot space? Well, we put it at 10 feet. We shine light down the wall. We shine light up the wall. And then we made this illuminated band around. So it's kind of like a wall sconce that wraps around the whole room. We do a lot of details. Just to say how it's built, there are manufacturers now coming out with extruded products. So if you want, and it comes in like crown molding, and it's basically made for this. You glue it on, right? And then you put your tape in it. So there's a lot of potential. We do some diagrams just to make it easier. Once an electrician has gone through it once you walk them through it once, they're probably going to be much better at it. Some electricians out there love figuring this out. I had one who did a DMX system for me, and he figured it all out on his own just because he loved geeking out on the technology and the drivers and figuring it out. But at the end of the day, it's about seeing it. It's about seeing that when we take the linear light out of the crown here, it does change the way that room feels, right? And you can say, I have a lot of people say, well, we don't need light under here. That's kind of superfluous. Look at what it does to the chairs when we turn that off. Like, it's not just the wood that goes, right? Did you say sad? Yeah, it's so sad, right? So let's get rid of the point source in here of the pendants. And those, the inside the cabinets and under the cabinets are also linear. So when we go down to recessed downlights, that's what that space looks like. But when you pull the linear and those pendants back in, that's what the space looks like. And when we show people this, they're like, yep, I'm in, right? That's how to do it. Here's another photo of that wine cellar, and you can see the only visible light source in that entire cellar is that one downlight. And if I could figure out how to do that invisibly, I would. So next time I'll ask them to take that piece of stone that it's sitting on, and I'll ask them to cut it thin, and then I'll use this awesome new product, right? And I'll make the stone glow, and then I can get rid of the recessed downlight in the ceiling. So just because it's fun to try to push those envelopes sometimes. So in review, is there a financial reason to start paying serious attention to linear lighting? Yes, okay, good. Are there health reasons to use linear lighting? Yeah. Where can you use linear lighting?
Where can't you?
What'd you say?
Where can't you?
Where can't you? Exactly, right? If I can use it in a walnut bar, I can use it anywhere. And then how do you get people to say, yeah, I want it? You show it to them, right? And you give them the details so that they can build it. We need to be doing linear, we need to sell American lighting. Yeah, so these are, I'm coming back to the learning objectives here, right? Yeah, so Will, make sure you write all 3 of those down. Yeah. And who was taking camera photos, you know? Yeah, make sure you take a photo of that one. Okay, Joel, make sure you get that. You downloaded it? Okay, good. Are there any questions? Thanks for your attention, I appreciate that. Any questions about linear? You can we clap louder, Will? Thanks.